Good morning, crime community. I'm here to change courses a bit. I'm going to read a prologue from a book from 1880 by Maria Edgworth called Popular Tales. Remember, it's from 1880. Preface. Some author says that a good book needs no apology, and as preface is usual and apology, a book enters into the world with a better grace without me. I, however, appeal to those readers who are not gluttons, but epicures in literature, whether they do not wish to see the bill of fare. I appeal to monthly critics, whether a preface that gives a view of the pretensions of the writer is not a good thing. The author may overvalue his subject and very naturally may overrate the manner in which it is treated, but still, he will explain his views and facilitate the meaningful and necessary art which the French call reading with a thumb. We call the hunting of a book, a term certainly invented by a sportsman. I leave the reader to choose what he pleases, which I lay before him, the contents and design of these volumes. Burke spoke that these are 80,000 readers in Great Britain, nearly 1/100th part of its inhabitants. One of these we may calculate that 10,000 are nobility, clergy, and gentlemen of the learned professions. Of 70,000 readers which remain, there may be who might be used to instruct by the books which were not published, professionally adapted to the classes where they had been enumerated, which the views of the following volumes have been composed. The title of Popular Tales has been chosen not as a presumptuous or premature claim of popularity, but from which they wish may be currently beyond circulars, which are sometimes exclusively considered as polite. The art of printing has opened up to all classes of people various new channels of entertainment and information. Among the ancients' wisdoms required austere manners at a length of beard to command attention, and in our ways, instructions in the dress of innocent accustom is not denied admittance among the wise and the good of the ranks, and is therefore hoped that the succession of stories adapted in different ages, sexes, and situations of life will not be rejected by the public unless they offend against morality, tire by the sameness, and disgust by the imitation of other authors. Rich and Lovell Edgeworth, Edgeworthstown, February 1800s. The four titles of these chapters or books: Murray the Unlucky, The Manufacturers, The Contrast, The Grateful Negro, Tomorrow. The first chapter is called Murray the Unlucky. We'll see if we could just read part of it. Chapter 1. It is well known that the Grand Signor amuses himself by going at night in disguise through the streets of Constantinople as a caliph, Harun al-Rashid, used formerly to do in Baghdad. One moonlight night, accompanied by his Grand Vizier, he traversed several of the principal streets of the city without seeing anything remarkable. At length, as they were passing a rope maker's, the Sultan recollected the Arabian story of Cogna Hassan al-Abal, the rope maker, and his two friends, Saad and Saadi, who differed so much in their opinion concerning the influence of fortune over human affairs. What is your opinion on this subject? Said the Grand Signor of the Vizier. I am inclined, please your majesty, replied the Vizier, to think that success in the world depends upon one's prudence when upon what is called luck or fortune. And I, said the Sultan, am persuaded that fortune does not more for men than prudence. Do you not ever hear of persons who are said to be more fortunate or unfortunate? How come it is that this opinion could prevail among men if it be not justified or experienced? It is not for me to dispute with your majesty, replied the prudent Vizier. Speak your mind freely. I desire and command it with your Sultan. Then I am of the opinion, answered the Vizier, that people are often led to believe others fortunate and unfortunate merely because they are only known the general outline of their histories and are ignorant of the incidents and events in which they have shown prudence and imprudence. I have heard, for instance, that there is present in the city two men who are remarkable in their good and bad fortune. One is called Murad the Unlucky, and the other is called Saladin the Lucky. Now I am inclined to think that if we could hear their stories, we should find that one of the prudent and the other an imprudent character. Where do these men live? Interrupted the Sultan. I will hear their histories from their own lips before I sleep. Murad the Unlucky lives in the next square, said the visitor. The Sultan desired to go thither instantly. Scarcely he had entered the square when they heard the city cry of loud lamentations. They followed the sound till they came to the house, of which the door was open, and where they were in a man tearing his turban and weeping bitterly. They asked the cause of this distress, and he pointed to the fragments of the china vase which lay on the pavement at the door. They were more undoubtedly to be beautiful Chin and the Sultan, taking up upon the broken pieces. And can the loss of the china vase be the cause of such violent grief and despair? Ah, gentlemen, said the owner of the vase, suspending the lamentations and looking at the dress of the pretended merchants, I see that you are strangers. You do not know how cause I have for grief and despair. You do not know that you are speaking to Murad the Unlucky. Were you to hear all the unfortunate incidents that have happened to me from the time I was born till this instant, you would perhaps pity me and acknowledge that I have cause for despair. Murad the Unlucky, my brother, on the contrary, was now cast down upon the poverty in which my father left us, and he said he was sure he could find someone means of maintaining himself, and so he did. On examining our china vases, he found then a powder of a bright scarlet color, and it occurred to him that that would make a fine dye. He tried it, and under some trouble he succeeded to admiration. During my father's lifetime, my mother had been supplied with rich dresses by one of the merchants who were employed by the ladies of the Grand Signor Serlio. My mother, on the other, done this merchant some trifling favors, and upon application to him, he readily engaged to recommend the new scarlet dye. Indeed, it was so beautiful that the moment it was seen, it was preferred to every other color. Saladin's shop was soon crowded with customers, and his winning manners and pleasant conversations, which almost as advantageous to him as his scarlet dye. On the contrary, I observed that the first glance of my melancholy countenance was sufficient to disgust every one who saw me. I perceived that plainly, and it was only confirmed to me that my belief in my own evil destiny. It happened one day that a lady richly appeared and attended the two female slaves, came to my brother's house to make some purchases. He was out, and I was alone, was left to attend the shop. After she had looked over some goods, she chanced to see my china vase, which was in the room. She took a prodigious fancy to it and offered me any price if I would part with it. But this I declined doing because I believed that I would draw down upon my head some dreadful calamity, as I voluntarily requested the talisman. Irritated by my refusal, the lady, according to the custom of her sex, became more resolute in her purpose, but neither entreaties nor money could change my determination. Provoked beyond measure by my obstinacy, and she called it, she left the house. On my brother's return, I related to him what had happened and expected that he would have praised me for my prudence, but on the contrary, he blamed me for the superstitious value I set upon the verses of my vase, and observed that it would be of the height of folly to lose a certain means of advancing my fortune for the uncertain hope of magical protection. I could not bring myself to be of his opinion. I had not the courage to follow the advice he gave. The next day the lady returned, and my brother and his vase and her for 10,000 pieces of gold. The money, he said, laid out in the most advantageous manner by purchasing a new stock of merchandise. I repented when it was too late, but I believe it is part of a fatality attending certain persons, and that they cannot decide rightly at the proper moment when the opportunity has been lost. I've always regretted that I did not exactly the contrary to do what I had previously determined upon, while which I was hesitating, the favorable moment passing, knew this is what I called being unlucky, but to proceed with my story. The lady who bought my brother Saladin's vase was a favorite of the Sultan's, and all powerful in his seraglio. He disliked to see me in consequence of my opposition to his wishes was so violent, and he refused to return to my brother's house, where I remained there. He was unwilling to part with me, but I could not hear to the ruin of so good a brother. Without telling him my design, I left his house, careless of what would become of me. Hunger, however, soon compelled me to think of something immediate mode of obtaining relief. I sat down up in a store, up in a stone before the door of the baker's shop. A smell of hot bread tempted me in, and with a feeble voice I demanded charity. The master baker gave me as much bread as I could eat upon condition that I should change dressers with him and carry the rolls for him through the city this day. To this I readily consented, and I had soon reason to repent of my compliance. Indeed, it is my ill luck, as not, as usual, deprived me of the critical moment of memory and in judgment, and should never have complied with the baker's treacherous proposal for some time before the people of Constantinople, and been much dissatisfied with the weight and quality of the bread finished by the bakers. The species of discontent had often been the sure forerunner of an insurrection, and in these disturbances the master bakers frequently lose their lives. All these circumstances I knew, but they did not occur to my memory that they might have been useful. I changed dresses with the baker, and scarcely had I proceeded through the adjoining street with my rolls before the mob began to gather round me, and with reproaches and execrations. The crowd pursued me even to the gates of the Grand Signor's palace, and the Grand Vizier, alarmed at the seizure, set out on order to have my head struck off, and usually remedy in such cases being to strike off the bachelor's head. I now fell upon my knees and protested as I was not the baker's for whom they took me, and I had no connection with him, and that I had never furnished the people of Constantinople with bread that was not weight. I declared I had not merely changed clothes with the master baker of the day, and that I should not have done so, but the evil destiny was governs all my actions. Some of the mob explained that I deserved to lose my head for my folly, but others took pity upon me, and while the officers who was sent to execute the vizier's order turned to speak to some of the noisy rioters who were torched by my misfortune upon the passage of me through the crowd, and then favored I effected my escape. I quitted Constantinople, my vase, and I had left in the case of my brother, and some miles distance from the city, I overtook a party of soldiers. I joined them, and learning that they were going to embark on the rest of the Grand Signor's army for Egypt, I resolved to accompany them. If it be thought I will Mohammed, and I should perish, the sooner I meet my fate, the better. The desperate dependency into which I had sunk was attacked, and so great a degree of indolence, and scarcely would take the necessary means to preserve my existence. During our passage to Egypt, I sat all day long upon the deck of the vessel, smoking my pipe, and I am convinced that if a storm had risen, and I expected I should have taken my pipe from my mouth, nor should I have handled a rope to save myself from destruction. Such is the effect of that species of resignation, of torpor, whatever you please to call it, to which my strong belief in fatality has reduced my mind. We landed, however, safely, contrary to my melancholy forebodings, by a trifling accident not worth relating. I was detained long than any of my companions in the vessel when we disembarked, and I did not arrive in the camp at El Arish till late at night. it was moonlight when I could see the whole scene distinctly. There was a vast number of small tents scattered over the desert of white sand, a few date trees, and a visible at the distance was all gloomy and all still. All around was a two herd, but that the camels feeding near the tents, and then I walked on and I met with no human creature. My pipe was by now out, and I quickened my pace a little towards the fire, and I saw neat one of the tents, and I proceeded. My eyes was caught with something sparkling in the sand. It was a ring, and I picked it up and put it on my finger, resolving to give it to the public crier the next morning, who might find it outright owner. But the ill luck, I put it on my little finger, in which I was much too large, and as I hastened towards the fire to light my pipe, I dropped the ring. I stopped in searching for it among the provider of which I mule for feeding, and a cursed animal gave me a kick in the head that I could not help roaring aloud. My cries awakened those who slept in the tent near which the mule was feeding, provoked me at my disturbed, and soldiers were ready enough to think ill of me, and they took it for granted that I was a thief and I had stolen the ring and pretended to have just found it. The ring was taken from me by force, and the next day I was landed for having found it, an officer persisting by the belief that stripes were make me confess where I had concealed certain of the articles of value which had lately been missed in the camp, and this was the consequence of my being in a hurry to light my pipe, and in my having put the ring on a finger that was too little for it, and this was one but Murad the unlucky would have done. When I was able to walk again after my woodeds was healed, I went into the tents distinguished with a red flag, having been told that there were coffee houses. While I was drinking coffee, I heard a stranger near me complaining that he had not been able to recover a valuable ring he had lost, although he had caused his losses to be published for 3 days for the public crier, offering a reward of 200 sequins to whoever should restore it. I guessed that this was a very ring which I had unfortunately found. I addressed myself to the stranger and promised to point out to him the persons who had forced it from me. The stranger recovered the ring, and being convinced that I had acted honestly, he made me a present of 200 sequins as some amends for the punishment of which I had unjustly suffered on his account. Now you would imagine that this purse of gold was advantageous for me. Far the contrary, it was the curse of new misfortunes. One night, when I thought that the soldiers who were in the same tent with me were all fast asleep, I indulged myself in the pleasure of counting my treasure. The next day, I was invited by the companions to drink sherbet with them. What they mixed with the sherbet which I drank, I know not, but I could not resist the drowsiness it brought on. I fell into a profound slumber, and when I awoke, I found myself lying under a date tree at some distance from the camp. The first thing I thought of when I came to the recollection was my purse of sequins. The purse I found for sale in my girdle, but upon opening it, I perceived that it was filled with pebbles, and not a single sequin was left. I had no doubt that I had been robbed by the soldiers with whom I had drunken sherbet, and I am certain that some of them had been awake at night, and I counted my money, and otherwise I had never trusted the secret of my riches to anyone. They could have been suspected me of possessing any property, for ever since I had company with them, I had appeared to be in great indulgence. I applied in vain to the superior officers of redress. The soldiers were protested that they were innocent. No positive proof appeared against them, and I gained nothing but my complaint, but ridicule and ill will. I called myself, in the first transport of my grief, by the name which, since my arrival in Egypt, I had avoided to pronounce. I call myself Murad the Unlucky. The name and the story ran through the camp, and I was accosted afterwards, since frequently by this appellation. Some indeed varied their wit by calling me Murad the purse of pebbles, and that I had yet suffered is nothing compared to my succeeding misfortunes. And this was custom of this time in the Turkish camp, for the soldiers had amused themselves with firing of a mark. The superior officers remonstrated against the dangerous practice, but ineffectually. Sometimes a party of soldiers would stop firing for a few minutes after a passage was brought them from their commanders, and then they would begin again in defiance of their orders, and such was the want of discipline in our army that the disobedience went unpunished. In the meantime, the frequency of the danger made most men totally regardless of it. It had seen it had seen tents pierced with bullets in which the parties were quickly seated, smoking their pipes without their preparing to take fresh air, and the red flag at the top. This apathy proceeded in some from the unconsequenceable indolence of body and of others, from the intoxication produced by the fumes of tobacco and opium, and in the most of my brother Turks, it arose from the confidence of belief in protestation inspired when a bullet killed one of their companions, and the only observed scarcely taking the pipes from their mouths. 1 hour is yet not yet come. It is not the will of Muhammad that we should fall. I own that this wrath secretly appeared to me at first surprising. It has soon ceased to strike me with wonder, and it even tended to confirm my favorite opinion that some of were born to good and some to evil fortune, and almost became almost as careless as my companions from following the same course as reasoning. It is not, thought I, as the power of human prudence to avert the stroke of destiny. I shall perhaps die tomorrow. Let me therefore enjoy today. I have made it my study every day to procure as much amusement as possible. My poverty, as you will imagine, restricted me from indulgence and excess, but I soon found means to spend what did not actually belong to me. There were certain Jews who were followers of the camp and who, culminating in the probability of victory for our troops, abandoned money to their soldiers, for which they engaged to pay with usurers exorbitant in interest. The Jews to whom I applied trade with me also upon their beliefs that my brother Saladin, with whose character and circumstances he was acquainted, would pay my debts, and I should fail. With the money I raised from the Jews, I constantly bought coffee and opium, in which I grew immediately fond, and the delirium it created, I forgot all my misfortunes and fear of the fortune. One day, when I raised my spirits by an unusual quantity of opium, I was strolling through the camp, sometimes singing, sometimes dancing, like a madman, repeating that I was not now Murray the Unlucky, and these words were on my lips frequently, spectator, and this was in position of this his solar senses, caught me by the arm and attempted to drag me from the place where I was exposing myself. Do you not see, he said, these soldiers? You are firing at a mark. I saw one of them just now deliberately take aim at your turban, and otherwise he was now reloading his piece. All ill luck prevailed even at this instant, and only instant in my life where I defied in power. I struggled with my adviser, repeating, I am not the wretch you take me for. I am not Murad the Unlucky, and lie unburied with a dog, a death thought worthy of Murray the Unlucky. By foreboding was not this time just a detachment of English soldiers passing near the place where I lay. My groans were heard by them, and they humanely came to my assistance. They carried me with them, dressed my wound, and treated me with the utmost tenderness. Christians thought they were. I must acknowledge that I had reason to love them better than any of the followers of Mohammed, my good brother, only expected. Under their care I recovered, but scarcely, but I regained my strength before I fell into my new disasters, and it was hot weather, and my thirst was excessive. I went out with the party in hopes of finding a spring of water. The English soldiers began to dig a well in a place pointed out to them to one of the men of science. It was not inclined to such hard labor, but preferred sauntering in such search of a spring. I saw at a distance something he looked like a pool of water, and I pointed it out to my companions. Their man of science warned me to this interpreter not to trust in this doubtful appearance, but that such were common in this country, and that I came close to the spot, I should find no water there. I added that it was at a greater distance than I imagined, and that I should, in all probability, be lost in the desert if I attempted to follow the phantom. I was so unfortunate I did not attend to the advice, and I set out to pursuit of this accursed delusion, which assuredly was the work of the evil spirits who clouded my reason and allured me into their destination. I went on hour after hour in expectation continually of searching the object of my wishes, and it fled faster than I pursued, and I discovered at last that the Englishman had doubtless gained his information from the people of the country was right, and that the shining appearance which I had taken for water was a mere description. I was now exhausted with fatigue, and I looked back in vain about the companions I had left. I could see neither men, animals, nor any trace of vegetation in the sandy desert. I had no recourse, but weary as I was, to measure back my footsteps, which were imprinted in the sand. I slowly and sorrowfully traced them as my guides to the unknown land. Instead of yielding to my indolent inclinations, I ought, however, to have made the best of my way back into the evening breeze sprang upon. I felt the breeze rising, and unconscious of my danger, I rejoiced and opens my bosom to meet it. And what was in my dimsy when I saw that the wind wept before it, and all trace of my footsteps in the sand. I knew not which was to proceed. I was struck with despair, tore my garments off my turban, and cried aloud. Nor neither human voice nor echo answered me. The silence was dreadful. I had tasted no food for many hours, and I now became sick and faint. I recollected that I had put a supply of opium in the fields of my turban, and also, when I took my turban up, I found that the opium had fallen out. I searched for it in vain, and on the sand where I had thrown the turban. I stretched myself out upon the ground and yielded without further struggle to my evil destiny. When I suffered from the thirst, hunger, and heat cannot be described. At last I fell into the sort of trance during which images of various kinds have seemed to flit before my eyes. How long I remained in this state, I know not, but I remember that I was brought to my senses by a loud shout which came from persons belonging to a caravan returning from Mecca. This was a shout of joy for the safe arrival in a certain spring, well known for them in the part of the desert. The spring was not 100 yards from the spot where I lay, yet such had been the fate of Murad the Unlucky, and he missed the reality that he had been hours in pursuit of the phantom, foibles and spiritless. So I sent forth as loud as I could in hopes of obtaining assistance, and endeavored in crawling into the place from which voices appeared to come. The caravan rested with a considerable time, while the slaves filled the skins with water, and while the camels took their supply. I worked myself on towards them, yet notwithstanding my efforts, I was persuaded that, according to my usual ill fortune, I could never be able to make any hear my voice. I saw them mend their camels. I took off my turban, unrolled it, and waved it in the air. My signal was seen. The caravan, came towards me. I had scarcely strength to speak. A slave gave me some water, and after I had drunk, I spoke to them, though I was, and how I came into the situation. While I was speaking on, the travelers observed the purse which hung to my girdle. I was the merchant for whom I recovered the ring I had given to me, and I was carefully preserved it. Became the initiation of my benefactor's name, and a passage from the Koran which worked upon it. When he gave it to me, he said perhaps we should meet again in some other part of the world, and he should recognize me as this token. This person, he now took notice of the purse, was his brother, and said, I related to him that I had obtained it, but he had goodness to take me under his protection. It was a merchant who was now going to the caravan to Grand Cairo. He offered me to take with him, and I willingly accepted the proposal, promising to serve him as faithfully as any of his slaves. The caravan proceeded, and I was carried with it. That is the end of chapter 1 of Murray the Unlucky. We've yet again to meet his brother, the lucky one, who share the fates of being lucky and unlucky. And we will see what their story continues with tomorrow. Do you feel unlucky or unlucky today? I'm not sure either. Have a good day.